And one of the reasons is because we as a church make a big missionary investment. And that investment is financial. It is financial. I think, that our faith promise budget is equal to about, 25% of the other budget or something? Do you know that? You don't know that off the top. It's about 25% of the other budget. This is not a boast, but a little unusual in churches our size, so we're glad for that. But we also make an investment of time. All of a sudden you'll hear, I think the pastor's leaving for India or leaving for wherever he's going. This is part of our church, just like Sunday school, just like Vacation Bible School and these things. And we're sort of doing a reassessing because there's some changes in the making. And the change, this is not a mystery. We've been upfront and honest about that. And so I've just been doing a lot of thinking about it. And I had some questions after the service last week, and even today I was asked another question about some of the things that I said. And so I just want to talk a little bit more about this. I shouldn't say a little bit more, but that really is my intention, to be perfectly honest about it. I know in missions the Lord's work isn't perfect. This isn't perfect because it's done by people. Well, the Lord's work is perfect. The Lord's work that people get involved in is not perfect. It's just not. And so we need to sort of come to grips with that. That's why sometimes churches disappoint. That's why sometimes pastors disappoint. It's why sometimes people disappoint. I know there's nobody around here that would disappoint, but some churches there are. I'm not looking for, there's no such thing as a perfect Bible college. There's no such thing as a perfect mission board. But what I've been doing is just sort of gone back to the drawing board in the sense of, what does the Bible teach? And we need to try to be as biblical as we can. We need to try to be as biblical as we can. Now, what I mean by that is, for example, there are no mission boards in the Bible. There's no such thing as that. But there's a place for them. There definitely is a place for them. So we need to think, what's biblical? What's not biblical? And where are we going? Where are we going? The Chapel Baptist Church. Where are we going? When you're a mission-minded church and you support the missionaries we do, and to the amount we do, word spreads. Call Chapel Baptist. See if you can get a meeting there. Missionaries don't want to go to churches that aren't supporting missionaries. Call Chapel Baptist. See if you can get a meeting with them. And by the way, that's a great testimony. But it's good to step back and say, okay, is our thinking and our practice biblical? So these 7 points on the handout are the same. Those are the 7 things from last week that I told you I didn't have time to put together, but I did this week. And so those are the 7 points. Mission should be guided by the inspiration of the Scripture. I'm not going to comment on these because you could just listen to last Sunday night on the internet. It's the responsibility of a church. Number 2, to do all we can to reach the world with the gospel. There's no such thing as, shouldn't be any such thing as, will our church be mission-minded or not? That's not biblical. In fact, you could say the church in the New Testament was all about missions. Now, that missions might have been across the street, right? It might have been around the corner. But it was about reaching lost people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Number 3, mission should primarily be about church planting. I know there are other kinds of mission work besides church planting. We're going to have a missionary on January 12th, is it? In the evening. The missionary Karen Meisenhelder, am I saying her name right, Candy? Kristen, right, sorry. Meisenhelder was Cammie's counselor when she went to the special mission camp last summer. That's who Kristen is. Well, she's obviously not a church planter because that wouldn't be biblical. I'm not suggesting that the only mission work there is church planting. But Jesus said, I will build my church. He didn't say, I'll build my Bible school. He didn't say, I'll build my anything else. He only said, I'll build my church. Therefore, I'm convinced. You don't have to agree. You can say to me later, look, I don't agree with that. That's fine. I'm personally convinced missions needs to either be church planting or directly related to church planting or a part of church planting. It's amazing the church lists I read of the missionaries that they support, some of them, how few are church planters. Now, look, the Lord's work isn't perfect. It's sometimes a little messy. So I wouldn't want to criticize them. I could tell you churches, the name of them, because I'm familiar with a lot of churches. But in the New Testament, Jesus said, I will build my church. Number 4, missionaries are sent by local churches. They're not sent by mission boards. They're sent by local churches, just like our church. That's how in the Bible it happened. The Lord touched somebody, and off they went to take the gospel where it had never been before. This is a whole nother subject, not even in these notes anywhere. I'm personally convinced, and I was taught this in Bible school, and now 32 years later I believe it, where it says, and God gave some evangelists and pastor teachers. I believe those evangelists are what we call a New Testament missionary. Someone who takes the gospel to a place or to a people where it's never been before. They were sent by churches. Because of that, number 5, missionaries are to be under the authority of and accountable to the church that sent them. And incidentally, this is nothing that we don't do right here. You know, we have a lot of people involved in a lot of things here. Robin's involved in the money. And Robin will send me an email and say, Chris, I have a question. What do you want me to do? Should I do this? Should I do that? I've learned all these years later, not just with Robin, but with people who know what they're doing, to say, look, what do you think's the best? Because usually the people in areas of responsibility in church, they know what's best. That's why they're in that area of responsibility. That's us accounting to each other. Art will say, look, I'm thinking about doing this. And then, with the building, Mike will say, look, we need to replace this. What do you think? A while ago, it was the pump on the pressure washer. What do you think? I don't know about pumps and pressure washers. I said, Mike, what do you think? And he said, well, I think it'd be cheaper to replace the pump if we could than buy a pressure washer. This is all about under the authority of and accounting to the church that sent you. That's just us all working together, giving people the opportunity to say, well, hold on, that might not be the best way. Giving someone being in the responsibility to say, halt, stop, that might not be the best way. And I don't have to be the halter. Whomever, just checking each other. It's not right to send missionaries to the mission field, and no one ever has the right to say, hey, and I mean that in a nice way, hey, I have a question. There is no one that is above questioning. No one. And it's not that I think missionaries are this suspicious group out there. It's that they're thousands of miles away, and in many cases, no one's directly overseeing. We think there is. No one's directly overseeing what they're doing. I'm not expecting anything of our missionary family that we don't expect right here. Number 6, churches should reproduce churches after their kind. There are some good and godly people out there. I don't agree with them on areas of doctrine that are not the cardinal doctrines of the Christian faith. Now, that was a sentence, wasn't it? I'm not starting churches. I'm not helping them start a church. Good people, godly people. Why would we start a church on the mission field that would be different than our church as far as what the Word of God teaches? And what the Word of God teaches we should do. Now, sometimes we say what a church should do that the Bible doesn't teach. We say, well, biblical churches do this, and it's not found anywhere in the Bible. In the book of Psalms, Jeff, they sounded the high-sounding cymbals. It's right in the Bible. It's there, right? But it makes no sense. Now, you might be thinking, maybe you went home last week, you popped your popcorn, you sat down in your chair and said, well, that was a little silly. Of course we wouldn't support churches that, help start churches that don't believe and do what we do. And I don't mean do what we do, sweep the floor this way or that way. I'm talking about the Bible. What you need to know is most churches never even ask the question about whether the church on the mission field is the kind of church they would start. We make assumptions that are not true. And let me say to you, the vast majority of mission boards and missionaries in our circles are good and godly people. But that doesn't mean we don't need to be held accountable. Someone might come up to me after the service, and I don't want to say this happens regularly. I'll make it sound like I say a lot of wrong things. But people say, Pastor, you said something today when you were preaching. I don't think that's true. And if you've had this experience, I'll say, what did I say? They say what I say. I say, yeah. I know right away. When they tell me, I'll say, let me think about that. That's not being ungodly. That's iron sharpening iron. In fact, it would be wrong to say, what he just said, I don't think is true, but we better not say anything to him. We better not say. That would be wrong to do. For my sake and for your sake. Number 7, in order to be biblical, a church must be autonomous. And that's sort of, I kind of rambled around last week. That's sort of where we sort of finished last week. And you'll notice on the back page, autonomous means self-governing under the lordship of Christ. So I asked these questions last Sunday night. Let me ask them a little different way. Is a group on the mission field a church if it's not autonomous? And the answer is no, it is not. In the Bible, this passage in Matthew 18, the reason I had you turn to it, this is not a sermon, it's not a Bible study, it's a talk. And hard to talk about this because it could come out, I'm sort of criticizing some missionaries. God knows in my heart I'm not doing that, but I need to just tell what the Bible seems to be teaching, so what we need to do. It's in Matthew 18 and verse number 17. Tell it unto the church. And that's the church is the final authority. So we need to be starting churches on the mission field that are autonomous. They're self-governing under the lordship of Christ. So that leads to another question. Is a group on the mission field autonomous if it's not self-supporting? So these two questions go hand in hand. If you're not autonomous, you're not a church. Can you be autonomous if you're not self-supporting? And the answer is no, you can't be. And I put on the page there, as long as an outside entity has a financial stake, it has a stewardship responsibility, and therefore a say, whether somebody likes it or not. So, for example, I've been to Tanzania 3 times with Rodney Myers and his wife Lynn, and twice with Rodney and Lynn, once with Aaron and Nicole. They're missionary partners the Lord raised up. The Shipes are going to be here sometime this winter. They're leaving on furlough 2 weeks after the Myers get back, and they're going to be in this area. And I said, Aaron, look, I'd love to have you come. Probably we're not going to support 2 missionaries working together, same place, same everything. But I'd love to have you come so the people can meet you, so you can meet they have 7 children? And their 7 children. That's who I was with last spring. Well, if I'm there and I say to Rodney, I have a question about something. Rodney knows I have a say, not a dictatorial say, not a, finger-wagging say, but we have a say because we have a financial stake there. And because we have a financial stake there, we have to answer to God. Do you follow that? Where we don't have a financial stake, we're not going to answer to God. Somebody else is. Where we can answer to God, we have the right and the responsibility to some degree to have a say. Now, I'm not nitpicking over words, but if we're going to use the word church to describe a group on the mission field, we should use the word biblically. Does that make sense to you? Like, we shouldn't be talking about the churches on the mission field that aren't a biblical church. I'm not being unkind. I'm not trying to be mean to anybody. But we should use it. If I use the word Holy Ghost, I should mean what the Bible means. If I use the word salvation, I should mean what the Bible means. If we're going to use the word prayer, it should be what the Bible's talking about. The same thing is true of the word church. If we're going to use the word church on the mission in relation to the mission field, it needs to be the biblical definition. And it might not be intentional. I would say in the vast majority of cases, maybe most of the cases, and I'm not thinking of someone that I think is being deceptive, but we need to be careful not to mislead the people back home. Do you follow that? If I say on the mission field, we have 10 churches that aren't biblical churches, and that's creating a picture in your mind. And the great thing is we have the standard of the Word of God. They might do some things different than us. As I say, most of the churches, many of the churches I've been in India use a tambourine as part of their music. I'm not going to be doing that, but that's neither here nor there with me. Most of the churches in Tanzania use a drum, but it's a very simple, small, like a little bongo drum, and they actually use a stick on it. And the stick sort of creates the rhythm. They're sort of counting the counts of the song by hitting the stick on the top, the side, rubbing it on the rim, this and that. You know, the other thing, they do it like that. I'm not talking about they need to do everything just the way we do it here, but if you're going to use the word church, it should be a biblical church, and we should not say things that could mislead the churches back home. So we ask ourselves, this is on your page there, the last thing. It's not the last thing in all these pages, but it's the last thing in yours. We have to ask ourselves, what will it take for a church on the mission field to become autonomous? To be self-supporting and self-governing? What would it take? Now, I think these are the three things it takes. I do not have scripture verses for them. You might say it's my opinion. You may add something to this, but I think this is what you might call the irreducible minimum. If you don't have these three things, you do not have an autonomous church. So number one, you need a trained pastor. You need a trained pastor. It's very interesting that the truth has to be taken somewhere, but the error's already there. You ever thought about that? I was preaching along here maybe 6 months ago and said that, and I had an out-of-body experience. I said, well, you have to take the truth somewhere, but the error's already there. When I said that, I had an out-of-body experience. And looked at myself and said, that's pretty good what you just said. I don't think I'd ever thought of it before. Like you have to plant the flowers, but you don't have to plant the weeds. They're already there. And on the everywhere, but on the mission field, there's so much error. The difference here is, in theory, there's more correction available. Someone might say, Pastor, I was listening to a sermon on the radio, and I'm not being unkind, and I'm not being rude, but what he said was the opposite of what you said, and I think he's right. There's sort of this self-check. Follow what I'm saying? But on the mission field, out in the middle of nowhere, because the places I've been, most of them are out in the middle of nowhere, there's nobody to check this national pastor. He's sort of a guy out there, literally roaming around in the wilderness, very sincere, doing the Lord's work, intending to do the right thing, but he has very little training. It is a formula for a disaster. Before long, he'll be a false teacher if we're not careful. So you have to have a trained pastor. You have to. Number two, you have to have a congregation that can financially support a pastor. Pretty basic, really, isn't it? You have to have a congregation that when Sunday comes, they're going to take an offering. You can believe what you want about tithing. There's a little bit of difference in opinion about this word tithing, but let's just say it in this plain way. What comes in the offering's got to pay the pastor's way so he can do the work of the ministry. That's what I mean by a congregation that can support the pastor. And number three, they need a place to meet. They need a place to meet. Even on the middle of the mission field, meeting under a tree doesn't fly for very long. You're going to need a place to meet. Now, I met a very interesting man in India. He's the president of the Faith Baptist Bible College in Trivandrum, India. The guy that I said last week said, Pastor, I have secrets, don't tell anyone. His name is Sambu, S-A-M-B-U, Nath, N-A-T-H, Day. His last name is Day. He goes by Dr. Day. A very intelligent, forward-thinking Indian man. Now, that is a very important statement. He is an intelligent, forward-thinking Indian man. Now, before I go on telling you a little more about some of the things he told me, let me say to you that by being forward-thinking may be personality. It may be gift, your spiritual gifts. It may be training, but it's very, very important. Here's why. Some people live their lives in a very reactionary way. Oh, it's morning. What should I do today? Well, I don't feel like doing anything today. So I guess I won't do anything. As I'm doing nothing, the phone rings. So I'm going doing this. In the middle of my phone call, this comes up. So I'm over here doing this. Dr. Day doesn't live his life. What happens, let me back up. People who are not forward thinking, their core principles often take a back seat to the here and now. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? And people like that do not make good leaders. They don't make good leaders. They don't make good leaders on the mission field. They might be able to be a church planter. They might be able to have a ministry. They don't make a good leader of the group. So how many years were you in the Army? Do you understand what I'm describing about leaders that are forward-thinking versus ones that are not? So did you ever have a commanding officer, someone over you, that was not forward-thinking, that was always responding to the here and now? It would be hard to fight a war, wouldn't it? It would be almost impossible. Maybe in your business, your work life, you worked for someone that wasn't forward-thinking. If you said to them, well, look, this has implications 3 months from now, and they said, 3 months from now? I'm trying to figure out where to go for my coffee break here in 15 minutes. Listen closely. I'm not criticizing. Those people are very impulsive. They're very impulsive. Like if you say to them, hey, you want to go on an adventure? They say yes. They don't say, what's the adventure? If you're me and someone says you want to go on an adventure, this is me. A what? It's not critical. It's just different, whatever. And let me say to you, now, I'm not saying any names. I'm not trying to be critical. But I thought that some people in India are not forward-thinking because of their culture. Then I met Sam Boudet. And I thought, well, that's funny, because he's very, very forward-thinking. If you say to Dr. Day, what's around the corner? He'll tell you. I don't mean literally what's around the corner. He'll tell you where we're going a year from now. He'll tell you his 5-year plan in just a sentence. He'll tell you. He'll tell you the next building project, how much it's going to cost, how many blocks it's going to take. He'll tell you, because he's just a very forward-thinking person. We need leaders like that on the mission field. We need leaders like that everywhere. We need leaders like that on the mission field. I have a friend, went to high school with him. He's the manager of a medical device manufacturing company in Connecticut. I don't remember what medical devices they manufacture, but like artificial knees, they manufacture things like that. His first name is John, and I said to him one day, John, what is your number one responsibility in your company? They have maybe 60 employees. He runs it. The owner is an older man, sort of hands off. He's there, but he stands back. John, my friend, runs it. I said, John, what's your number one job? He said, Chris, he didn't even have to think about it. He said, my number one job is looking around the corner. He said, my job's to know what's coming. He said, if I do not know what's coming, he said, we're dead. He said, we're dead. Our company will be out of business. He said, we'll do a great job at the here and now. And then the guy looking around the corner will fly right on by us. Now, in his case, it's about business. I only mention that about Dr. Day because he was very forward-thinking, and I learned a lot from this man. Maybe 60 years old, educated in the Bible in the United States, started a Bible college in India. And Dr. Day, I learned a few things from them. I want to list them off. Number one, he only supports 3 church planters because that's the number that he can properly oversee. That's it. 1, 2, 3. That's it. If I said to him, Dr. Day, and I probably did, why don't you support 4? They have 150 students in their school, and they've been in business for like 30 years. If I said, why don't you support 4? He'd say, Pastor, you can only do as the leader what you can properly oversee yourself. So, listen closely. He doesn't assume that more is better. He wouldn't think of himself more successful if he had 4 church planters. He wouldn't think of himself more spiritual if he had 12 church planters. In other words, he's not simply trying to have as many as possible. He's trying to have the number that he can effectively oversee firsthand, because he knows around the corner those 3 churches will still be in existence in 10 years. You follow what I'm saying? Number 2, I learned from Dr. Day, he views his oversight as being more than handling, let me say it this way, he views it more as handing those church planters their pay and having occasional communication with them. If I said, Dr. Day, do you do more than hand your church planters their pay and have occasional communication with them? He'd say, if that's what I did, Pastor, I would be negligent. That's why there's only 3. Number 3, and by the way, let me tell you where this is going. Here's one of the big questions I'm wrestling with. We're going to be wrestling with national church pastors, to support or not to support. Wasn't it Shakespeare who said, to be or not to be? That is the question. By the way, he was wondering if it was worth being alive. He was trying to figure out if life was better than death, to be or not to be. One of the questions we're wrestling with, we are and we're going to be more, is to support national church pastors or not to support them. That's where this all fits. Number 3, Dr. Day requires extensive financial accountability, including written records. And the same thing he expects from those 3 church planters, he expects from himself. So when he was telling me that, he said, let me show you my financial report. And he has no idea that I've been going through this and studying it and processing it. He disappears around the corner and comes back with a stack of paper, 8.5 by 14. That's the size, by the way, of paper most places in the world. It's not 8.5 by 11, it's 8.5 by 14. He's got this stack of paper. I would say probably 150 to 200 pages. He said, this is my financial report for this month. He might have said 3 months. It doesn't matter. He's holding it. He said, this is it. Every financial transaction is signed off by at least 3 people, including himself. No bills get paid unless 3 people initial the bill. Let me just say to you, as far as mission work, almost unheard of, that kind of accountability. Number 4, he requires the church, these church planters, from day 1, the day they held their first service, he requires them to start a general fund and a building fund. Day 1. They call him every Monday, and he goes through the financial report with them. How much money did you have last week? How much came in the offering? How much came in the building fund? How much did you deposit in the building fund? What are the expenditures? And then expects it in writing from them. If I said, Dr. Day, my mission work anywhere, it doesn't have to be India, of money sort of works out of my pocket. Works out of my pocket. A few dollars here and a few dollars there. And where'd the money go? And if I said, well, I'm really not sure. I don't know what he would say to me, but I think he'd say, you have no business overseeing the Lord's work. Number 5, this is very interesting. He only supports a pastor that has a skill or profession by which he can support himself. In other words, he doesn't support a church planter that can't support himself and his family until the church can do so. In other words, let's say I start the Chapel Baptist Church, I'm an electrician, and I'm supporting myself until the church can support me. I'm going to try to build the church as fast as I can because I want to stop screwing in light bulbs. Like, that's my knowledge of electricity. You follow what I'm saying? The incentive is you can stop working that job to support your family when the church can replace the support. You follow that? Incidentally, church planting is only one aspect of his ministry. He also has a degree-granting Bible college that has 150 students in it. He also has a church of about 65, of which he is the senior pastor. He also has a Bible correspondence ministry in India. So this idea to support or not support national pastors, that's one of the key questions I'm wrestling with. It's known that we plan to recommend to the church to stop supporting the pastors in India that we support. To most people, that's not a shocking announcement. We've been talking about it for months. And just so you know, we gave a 1-year notice about that. We gave a 12-month notice to replace our support to the national pastors in India. But the question becomes, to support or not support? Are we looking for new ones somewhere else? That's the question. This is what Dr. Day wrote to me. He said, supporting national pastors requires, quote, this is an exact quote, the wisdom of Solomon, end quote. He said, Pastor, this takes the wisdom of Solomon. He said, if you aren't careful and there's not proper accountability, you'll create a culture of dependency. And let me say to you, I'm guilty. It's like when I was sitting there for jury duty, and this judge, I don't know if you've ever gone through this questioning for jury duty thing when you get called up to the room and they ask questions. Well, this judge was very involved. The two attorneys didn't ask a lot of questions. The judge asked most of them. And she walked sort of out to where we were sitting. We're sitting here. And she was a little bit of a high-strung Italian woman, but that was okay because I grew up around high-strung Italian women. And she said, okay, she said, I have a question here, she said. I would like to know if any of you here talk on your cell phone when you're while you're driving your car. Well, I raised my hand. And she said, sir, juror number, whatever my number was, you? Sometimes you talk on your cell phone while you drive your car? I said, Your Honor, sometimes I do. You asked. And I wanted to say, by the way, all the rest, I was the only one to raise my hand. I want to say all the rest of these do too. They're liars. You don't want them on the jury. So when I say you create a culture of dependency, I'm raising my hand. I am guilty. I'm guilty. And what I did was help support pastors right here without looking around the corner. And look, I did it sincerely. I was trying to help. And by the way, you trusted me and helped me do that. You're complicit because you took my word for it. This is a good thing. But let me say to you, the places I've been, I don't know so much about some of the places I've been in, but I know a lot about Tanzania and I know a lot about India. And here's what I've come to realize. If there's a steady stream of money from the United States, the church will never be able to support the pastor. Why would they? Why would you give to the Chapel Baptist Church if you knew we had a wealthy benefactor who sends us $1 million a year? Why would you do that? You might say, well, Pastor, it's because it's right to tithe. I agree with that. But wouldn't you find it a little difficult to write your tithe check, whatever you consider tithing? Wouldn't you find it difficult to write out if you knew, I'm sitting here thinking, it's December 1st, and on December 31st, the check for $1 million comes. It's coming pretty soon. This is going to be good. It would be tough to give. Well, look, a pound's a pound the world around. Why would Indian people give if all they have to do is sit back and watch and say, look, I don't know where all this money comes from, but it's coming from somewhere. Why would they do that? He said, you will create a culture of dependency, listen to this, and a climate, his exact words, and a climate for corruption and dishonesty. So there are two keys, SEO and LESEO. Come help me here. And look, I'm almost done. If you can smell that popcorn of yours back home, I'm almost done. It's almost like, Mike, when I say, can you smell the ashes from Ash Wednesday? If you grew up in a Catholic church and someone mentions the incense, like on Ash Wednesday or any Mass, you can start to smell that. You can start to smell that smoke right away. So, why don't you guys come up here, because I got to look at my notes too, because I can't remember what I'm getting ready to say. Okay, here it is. There's two key people in this business of supporting on the mission field. This is one of them. He's the guy who gets the money in the United States. This is not some great person like, some highfalutin person. I need to say that because here, this is me. You just trust me that if I come back from Tanzania and say, look, I met a pastor and and it's amazing. It's amazing. I've been to India 11 times. I've been to Tanzania 4 times. And I've never been asked by a Tanzanian pastor for one thing. Not one thing. And they're just as poor. It's not their culture. I thought it was. See, I'm a learner. I'm going to die and say, well, I finally learned one thing. I'm embarrassed that I'm a learner, but I'm honest about it. I thought it was culture. It's not. It's all in the way you start the ministry. It's in this. Okay, great. Different illustration. This isn't me anymore. Great. Nice to have you. You want to be a pastor? You want to be a church planter? This will be great. Go ahead. No. Go ahead. Or saying to him, this is great. You want to be a church planter? This will be great. That's great. Here's your first month's pay. Go ahead. See the difference? What's the problem with your shoes? You need new shoes? Let me help you out. There you go. What's that? You got a toothache? You need to have a tooth pulled? Here, go get your tooth pulled. What happened to your glasses? I said to a pastor in India one day, I'm looking at him. His glasses look like this. And I'm not making fun of him. I said, what's wrong with your glasses? He said, I broke them. I said, well, you need new ones. He said, yeah. I said, how long has it been since you had your eyes checked? He said, years. I said, later, let's get him to the eye doctor, get his eyes checked, get him new glasses, I'll pay. And let me say to you, it's hard not to help in these places. So as guilty as I am, I think you would have done the same thing. And by the way, you know what the eye exam in that guy's glasses cost me? Less than $20. It's hard not to help. But it doesn't help him. It's not helping him. He's thinking, where's Pastor Luppino? Where's Pastor Luppino? Oh, there he is. Oh, my tooth. Oh, my other. Oh, my eye. Oh, my shoe. Oh, my coat. Oh, my kids' school tuition. Oh, I need a motorcycle, a scooter. And listen, if I said these very same things in India, it would be offensive to them. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. That's the way it is. If you create a culture of dependency. Okay, back to my illustration. So there's the guy who's receiving the money. That here is me. I don't literally take the money, but I'm the guy you're trusting. Okay? Then there's the guy on the mission field. That's this guy who hands the money out. So let's say he's handing money to Art and Joyce, and he's handing money to David and Angela. So Mike and Robin hand money to him. He sends the money to him. I'm getting dizzy, are you? He's sending the money to them. These are the most important two people in the mixture. Because I'm not going to know him. I can't know. You can't go to India twice a year, sit down with Art over rice and sit down with Dave and Angela over curry and walk away and think you know them. I thought I did, but you know, it's like when you know on your job the inspector's coming. What do? Get everything in shape. Guess what it's like the next day? I absolutely have no malice in my heart whatsoever, but I guarantee you the words have been said in India. You better straighten that mess out. Pastor Luppino's coming. Follow me? Do you know there are ministries in India that change the sign at their gate depending upon what ministry's next to come visit them? It's Baptist this week, Presbyterian next week. That's what makes this guy, the receiver, who's the conduit to get it to this guy, that's what makes these two guys so important. You guys can important your way back to your seat. Thanks for your help. And I'm almost done. I'm on the last side of the last page. These two guys need to know a few things. And let me tell you the most important thing they need to, well, there's a few things. They need to know what they really believe from the Word of God. And need to be trusted. If I say to that guy, so you're going to use this money to help Art Barnett, he has the responsibility to know that guy's doctrine is squared away. I'm not trying to be crude or that. I'm just saying he's the guy who needs to know that. By the way, I don't even speak his language. I don't even know if I say, now, Art, I have a question for you. What do you believe about the inspiration of Scripture? He can say anything he wants. I don't know what he said. And incidentally, if he knows my wallet is dependent on that, he's going to tell you the right answer. At least the answer you want to hear. Look, it's human nature. That's what Dr. Day meant when he said, look, this takes the wisdom of Solomon. That's what he meant when he said, if you're not careful, you will create a culture of dependency and you'll create a climate for dishonesty and corruption. We need to know that. This guy and this guy need to speak the same language. Period. If this guy, I, speak English, and this guy speaks mostly Swahili, forget it. Forget it. There's problems coming. He's got to be a guy that speaks English, and well. They need to both have an understanding of accountability. Accountability about money. Listen closely, and how that's viewed in the culture. How is that viewed in the culture? If I said, look, I know a pastor in India, he needs a motorcycle, it's going to be $1,000. If Mike comes to me and says, and it could be anyone in this room because it's the American culture. To us, it's just right. Mike and Robin come to me and say, Chris, we have a little extra money. We'd like to help that guy get that motorcycle. Here's the $1,000. I say, okay, that's great. Here we go. And I go over to this guy, bypass that guy because that guy doesn't exist. In this illustration, I bring it to Art and say, here's your motorcycle. Do you know that in Africa and in the Middle East in general, it doesn't matter what you tell him that money was for? Do you know that? I had to learn that. It doesn't matter. If Art's walking to buy the motorcycle and he's in Tanzania and he meets his cousin and his cousin says, my daughter has a hospital bill that needs to be paid today. Do you have any money? Culturally, he has got to give that money to his cousin. Has to do it. Well, I've got news for you. That just ain't going to fly with Americans. To you and I, that is so foreign, isn't it? Like, that's foreign to me. You give me $1,000 for a motorcycle and you told me you had a wedding with it? The Lord, through these hands and through our bookkeeping system, gave $700 for one of our pastors in India one time for a need. And I got a phone call. And the person on the other end said, Pastor, so-and-so's getting married, and I just found out they don't have money for their wedding. Could we use the $700 for the wedding? And I made the mistake of saying yes. Because I didn't know what I was doing. And incidentally, the person who gave it to me, if I'd have said to them, this is for a wedding, they would have said, that's fine. I didn't deceive the person who put the money into our system at all. But I was worked on the other end. I was worked on the other end. I'm not pointing any accusing fingers at anyone, but going forward, by the grace of God, and this work's messy, when you cross through cultures, I'm not doing that again. I should have said, absolutely not. I should have said, send the money back. And don't ask for more, is what I should have said. But the thing that you have to understand is, in different cultures, that's viewed differently. If some of you will remember Titus Sakawa. Titus was a Tanzanian that we supported. Nice guy. But this is where our falling out with Titus Sakawa was. Accountability on money. If Titus Sakawa was sitting here, he would scratch his head. He would not understand if I said, send the money back. To him, that would be very ungodly. To him, that would not be Christ-like. Because in their culture, the money you have in your pocket, you're supposed to make available and use to whoever you want to use it with at the time that you need it. Titus Sakawa, I'm pointing there as if he was sitting there. Titus Sakawa said to me one day, I'm tired of Americans treating me like a child when it comes to money. I said, Titus, I'll just tell you this. If you don't provide proper accountability and use the money for what it was given, you're not getting any more. Americans aren't going to give you any more money. Just as soon as they think you don't use it for what you told them you were using it for, I said to an American, that's guaranteed. Their wallet just closed. So these two guys need to understand each other's culture. Follow what I'm saying? Because culture is so different. Both of these people need to know something else, and I'm going to finish with this for tonight. They need to know the end game. Now, you may not like the word end game because it makes it sound like reaching the world with the gospel is a game, but it's not. I use the word end game because we understand those terms. You know, if someone here said to me, so Pastor, this is what I want to suggest we do. I want to suggest we loan half of our chairs and half of the tables to such and such a place for such and such a reason. I want to know the end game. What's the end game? When they coming back? Who's going to be responsible if something happens to them? We understand that. You might prefer to call it the end plan because game makes it sound like, you know, a trivial thing. But we use that. We've sent thousands and thousands of soldiers into war, and that's how we use the term. What's the end game? In other words, where are you going with this? Where are you going? Where are you going with this money? What's the end game? What's the end of the road? What is the point at which you can say, that's it, close the door, we're going home? Both of them need to know the end game. I got an email from a missionary who lives in the villages. He's a retired missionary that had been supported by our church, one of our churches in Maine, who read my missionary updates, and he emailed me, said, Chris, let me tell you, I understand. He was a missionary for like 45 years in the jungle of Brazil. He said, I hear where you're coming from. He said, I'm following you completely with this. He said there are missionary after missionary after missionary that have no end. He called it an end plan. They don't have an end plan. Now let me say to you, we may never get to the end plan. Right? We may say the end plan is an autonomous local church, and when there's an autonomous local church there, I'm going to move on and start a church somewhere else. And we may not get there. The Lord's work can be messy. The Lord's work can be challenging. It doesn't always happen the way we hoped, right? But if there's no end plan, if there's no end game, it's like a hole, it's like a sinkhole, sucking up time and money and attention and understanding. It's just going down into the sea. It's like saying we're going on a trip. Where are you going? Don't know. How long are you going to be gone? Don't know. What route are you going to take to get there? Don't know. Now look, hey, that may appeal to some of you. That's like that, you know, if Mike said to me, have I got an adventure for you? I'd think, no, you don't. I won't be having any part of it. I'm just talking about pack your bags, going on a trip. You have no idea where you're going. What if we all piled in the car and we said, no idea where we're going? We get almost, we get halfway up the United States, and someone says, well, let's go to Canada. All right, good, let's go to Canada. Well, we have a problem now, because you either have to have a passport card or a passport to cross the border into Canada. If you don't have a passport or a passport card, because you're not flying, you're driving, you can use that passport card, you can't go in under any conditions. It's not going to happen. We may never get to the end game. Getting to the end game can be a nasty business. Getting to the end game can be 3 steps forward and 3 steps back. Getting to the end game can think we've almost got an autonomous local church and the whole thing collapses under you. I'm not setting a standard when you have to reach the end game, but you'd be shocked how many missionaries have no end game. They have no end plan. If you said to them, when will your work here be done? They have no answer to that. And by my understanding, and I definitely could be wrong, by my understanding, that's not biblical. Not only is it not biblical, it's no common sense to it. Because being able to travel to the mission field and do missionary work could end at any moment. At any moment. The chapel, if I get struck by lightning tonight, the Chapel Baptist Church is going on. Oh, somebody's going to have a little bit of a hassle. But it's going to go on. No problem. It's going to go on. It'll certainly easily go on financially. Robin can do the finances of the Chapel Baptist Church without Chris Luppino. Like, all I have to do is every now and then do my part of getting the mail and put my initials on the bills. I'm not saying it's not necessarily important, but it'll go right on. No question. The preaching will go right on. We have more men in our church that could stand up here and preach next Sunday night than churches 3 times our size. That's the truth. It'll go right on. Most missionary work, and it's of no malicious intent. It's the result of a person who's not forward thinking. And maybe I shouldn't say most. A lot of mission work, if the key person goes down, the whole thing goes down. And that's just not biblical. That's just not biblical. It's not biblical. It should be able to go on without you. So anyway, like I said, this isn't a sermon. I'm just talking. I think I have a few more thoughts, but I'll spare you them tonight. I just need to read, because I'm asking, Lord, what do you want me to do? So I met a guy in India. I'll tell you about this quickly. I met a guy in India named Athem Choti. Athem is one of these guys right here. I rode around with Athem a little bit, a few times alone. We no sooner drove away, and he said, Pastor, I need you. Pastor, I need you. I said, what do you need? I need a partner. He said, I need God to send me a partner. What kind of partner? Just like you. I said, you don't even know me. Yes, I do. You don't know about me. Yes, I do. Pastor, I need you to partner with me. I need help. What's help? I need counsel. I need support. I need, and he meant not money. He meant holding up support. He said, I need money. He said, it takes an investment of money to do what we're doing. He said, I need you. He emails me every few days. Pastor, I wrote an article for you. Would you read this? Tell me what you think of this. Amazing Indian guy. Amazing. Speaks perfect English. Forward thinker. Who has, I think, 40 church planters working under him. And he doesn't support them all. So I'm just praying with him and for him. Lord, and I think the Lord wants me to go back there and visit him again. Just spend time with him. Because look, I have a burden to help. Our help has been zeroing in on training national pastors. And I have the burden. I'm not boasting. I have the ability. I pastor a church that is willing. We got to find the right guy. We got to find the right place. And it's interesting. Before I ever went to India, Jim Starr sent me an email and said, you should plan a trip back to Bagdogra as soon as you can to visit with Athem more. I never asked him why. He just said, you should see him more. Athem took me to the airport the day I left. We got 50 feet from the hotel. Pastor, I pray that you will pray and ask God if you could come back here and visit me more and help me. I need some time. I need the time of a counselor. I need the time of someone who can just talk with me about what we're trying to do. I need time with someone who will say, well, look, why don't you let's do it this way. Why don't we do it? Well, let's not do it that way. And he was right up front, and I need financial support. He didn't bat an eyelash. I need financial support. Pastor, please pray about coming back to help me. So that's what I'm praying about, going back there to help him and just to visit with him. Now look, if I get up in the morning, the Lord closes the doors, I'll say, praise the Lord. Nancy, call Mike. Let's get the cookies going. Not that I'm against that, but this is a lot of work. It's draining. It's a big investment. Takes a lot of time. But look, I'm not closing the door on Vacation Bible School. If you can't help in Vacation Bible School, we're having it. If no one came this year and said, if no one said I could help in Vacation Bible School, we're having it just the same. We're having Vacation Bible School if Nancy has to do it all. I mean, if we have to do it all together. We're not closing the door on it. It is the only thing we can get kids from this community to come to. We're not going to be able to stop doing it. We get a few kids for this and a few kids for that, but Bible school, for some reason, away they come. We're not going to close the door on anything till the Lord says close the door. He hasn't said close the door on traveling to the mission field, so we need to know where, because you can travel, you can go. They'll have you come, especially if you've got a wallet. And I'm not being unkind. So we're asking God, where and when, and what is our philosophy? So Athem has written me about 6, he calls them articles. He means like a magazine newspaper article. So I decided to write some myself to send back to him and say, look, you need to know how I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking. Just to find out how much understanding there really is between the country. Because this is the guy. It's not that guy. That guy's his problem. If this guy's the right guy, that guy's his problem. I can't go to India and say, so Athem, tell me about art. Is he blah, 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 blah. You can't do that in 2 weeks in a year. You can't do that in 2 visits of 2 weeks in a year. That's what he's there for. He's the key guy. You following me? In Tanzania, Rodney Myers is the key guy. I don't say to Rodney, so Rodney, what about blah, 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 blah? He does all that. because he's a trusted guy. He just says, Pastor, we'll leave here in the morning at 7 o'clock. We'll be back in 5 days. Be ready. I say, okay. Whatever he says we go do. Okay, let's take just 5 minutes of questions because, I leave questions laying all over the place like grenades. And I had some very good questions after the service last week between then and now. Does anyone have a question? Because I don't want to create any confusion. Dan. How it started. If you start it by saying, okay, you guys are going to go pastor underground churches. Now, you understand the underground church is not underground. It's unlicensed. That's what it means. You guys are going to start our underground churches, okay? Great. Here's your $100. Here's your $100. I'll bring you another $100 next week. Where do you think they're getting it next week? From me. And the next week, they're going to get it from me. If I say, look, the Lord wants you to be a underground church planter, great. Is Rob and your wife behind this? Yes. Okay, great. Go for it. We'll get together in 30 days. We'll regroup. We'll talk. But as soon as you start handing out the money, they will never is a big word, almost never be able to conclude the money's coming from anywhere but you. They're always going to conclude the money's coming from you because you started. It's all, Dan, in the way you start it. If you don't start supporting underground pastors in China, they're never going to expect you to. That's why Rodney Meyer's mission, the Gospel Furthering Fellowship in Tanzania, they started in 1946. It says right in their founding documents, they do not support national pastors, and they do not under any condition. The Gospel Furthering Fellowship does not support. And one of their pastors said to Rodney Myers, by the way, Rodney Myers' name is actually James. It's J. Rodney Myers. They call him James. For some reason, he uses the word name James. I think it's because Rodney, there's no Rodney in Swahili, but the word Jamesy is Swahili for James. They said, Jamesy, if we just pay some money, we could have way more pastors and way more churches. And Rodney said, well, what would we really have? What would we really have? Are we still recording? Yeah. Okay, let's wrap up the recording.
Okay. Tammy, stop it.
Please. Because I want to just say something about that.